Hey all, Siege here, and guess what? It's theory time, and I've got a doozy for you. Yeah, that's right. Definitely something to think about moving forward in Warframe's story. Now, mind you, this is just a theory, but I think there's enough evidence here to warrant a discussion. And what I'm referring to is the fact that, well, I'm not completely convinced anymore that the void jump accident the Zarimen 10-0 and its crew experienced was actually an accident. Rather, it may have been a staged situation in order to conduct an experiment. On top of that, well, I'm not even sure the Tenno existed before the unexplainable return of the Zarimen. At least as children, mind you. Something that's starting to bring the Duviri Paradox into focus a little bit more. So let's put some of the facts out there and see what you all think. First, I really hate having to say this still, but if you haven't played the Second Dream, War Within, Chains of Harrow, or The Sacrifice, well, there's quite a few spoilers in here, okay? But what you might want to ask yourself at this point is, what are you doing? Get on it already! Alright. Now, let's get back to this. The Zarimen 10-0 was a military ship, not a freighter or the type of ship you might expect to be a transport for a large contingency of families, which is often what's assumed to be on that ship, right? Now, is it possible that the occupants of the Zarimen 10-0 were sent into the void as guinea pigs instead of colonists, purposely, to see what it would do to humans already loyal to the Orokin? It gave the machines power enough to become sentient and pose an impossible threat to the Orokin. Is it really that far a stretch to think they wouldn't sacrifice a few soldiers in a military vessel for the possibility of having super soldiers infused with void energy capable of fighting off the sentient threat? I mean, that's what they got too, right? Consider that the Warframes are actually that same exact experiment, with the Orokin dealing with something they had no control of, substituting the infestation for the power of the void in that particular instance, mind you. They took soldiers, infused them with infested flesh, and hoped for the best. Which, didn't really work out that well either, as the Warframes were overwhelmingly considered failures until the arrival of the Tenno. Because they became a force the Orokin couldn't control and count on to fight in their names. And the Sacrifice quest shows most likely why, that is, with the way they were treated, of course. I guess what I'm saying is, the Orokin have done it before. There's no reason to think they wouldn't experiment, rather recklessly I might add, with what they witnessed this power could do. Again, they've seen what it can do to regular machines. Really, what's the worst that could happen at this point? They've already created one enemy they can't deal with in the Sentients. Making one more has a, 50-50 chance of them being friendly to your cause, right? Unless we forget, the Orokin were, quite narcissistic in their power and quote-unquote genius. But their desire for perfection is littered with a whole host of terrible mistakes. Too often, I think, they were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't always stop to think if they should. So, they send a bunch of soldiers into the void and press their luck, even though we're meant to believe they sent families or colonists. There were no kids, at least according to Ember Prime's Codex, where we find that when Colleen, the principal investigator of the Zarimen 10-0 incident, noted that while conducting her personal inspection of the ship, there was literally no trace of the original crew. But what did she find? Children. So, are these children not part of the original crew? And let me make mention that she says children, not the children, just children, which I think is important context and lends itself to the thought that these kids were not part of the crew that originally left. Well, at least not looking like this, right? Still not convinced? Well, at the end of the passage, Colleen asks the military tribunal she's being examined by why they would ever consider putting children on a military vessel, to which the person replies, "We didn't. That would violate procedure." Yeah, it would be odd to put kids on a military ship, wouldn't it? Now, during the War Within quest, did anybody else find it interesting that the Grineer Queen knew so much about what was happening in the Zarimen during the so-called accident? How does she know everything that went on? I mean, I guess you might say that this is like a mind meld between her and the Tenno, and by sharing a mind, she knows what they've experienced. But then how does Teshin not only appear in there, but actively work to undermine what she's trying to do? And how does he know so much about transference, Margulis, and is so sure that what he's willing to undo would be a good thing? You know, they really don't put this front and center during the quest, but the Grineer Queen is actually an Orokin who has transferred bodies a few times now, and at the moment, this is the form she currently occupies. Now, during the quest, she makes mention of the fact that she knows about the Orbiter, she includes herself in the conception of the Warframes, and then there's this line.
We gave you your precious gifts, and now, just as easily, we take them all away.
They gave you your gifts? Is she referring to the Warframes or their void powers? The Warframes in themselves were an experimental accident. Were the void powers achieved in a similar experimental way? At the end of the day, I know these pieces don't fit together correctly. More and more I'm leaning towards the idea that this person we see in the Duviri Paradox is the original crew member of the Zarimen 10-0, most likely a soldier that either willingly or unwittingly made the jump to the void in order to ascertain what effects it might have upon a loyal soldier or even civilian, even though, again, having military personnel aboard a military vessel makes the most sense. And they have to be stuck in some type of rift in time, which, of course, the void is considered to be. It's assumed this character has existed, well, at least as long as the Tenno, and yet they really don't look like they've aged much either, right? And the actual Zarimen 10-0 returned years ago, except it's here and with no traces of any of the crew. Well, except the children. It's an odd coincidence that the Orokin were already in the process of transferring themselves into younger bodies in order to live on in a form of immortality called continuity. Do you think it's possible everything that happened was exactly what the Orokin wanted? Think about it. If you were an Orokin noble in the business of immortality, one that requires a consistent stream of younger hosts, wouldn't the idea always be to improve the process and maybe make it so you don't ever have to do that again? Well, in that instance, what would be better than an immortal child? It seems to me that during the War Within quest, that's exactly what the Grineer Queen had in mind. Now, I'm definitely not saying the Tenno came out as planned here, mind you, but I just think that they ended up being the best possible outcome for the Orokin. They just needed time to understand the Tenno, that's all. After all, those that had come into contact in the days after the Zarimen returned were, well, not doing so good. Kayleen had her face and skin pretty much melted off just for trying to comfort the children, and Margulis went blind trying to care for and understand them. But something happened that finally gave her the will to attempt continuity and stand in the presence of these kids. So something obviously changed in her perception of the Tenno. What gave her this confidence? I don't know, but I suppose we're going to find out. That being said, here are my final thoughts. One, obviously we are the same as, or will at least be connected to, the older Tenno. The question is, how's that going to be? Alright, here's my hottest take. Kind of in the same vein that the Tenno were housed in Lua as a way to protect them, I feel like this space in the void protects the Tenno's mortal self in a pocket in time. And now we're going to have to protect ourselves from the sentience. I mean, at this point, it's really the only way to ground the Tenno, isn't it? Power creep isn't just an issue in game. It's a problem lore-wise as well. Think about it. What exactly can defeat the Tenno? They exist as immortal gods with regenerating Wolverine-style suits of flesh, each with their own specially awesome godlike powers. It's like writing for Superman. What do? You invent kryptonite, of course. And well, my money's on this guy right here. Did I mention the lore is heating up? This is getting fun. At any rate, let me know if you enjoyed the video today and what you think about this potentially interesting turn in Warframe's story. Oh, please feel free to correct anything that I may have misinterpreted. Actually, let's be real, you're going to do that anyway, so how about just be gentle? Sound good? At any rate, I want you all to have a wonderful day today, and I'll talk at you in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.